So the reason why I decided to cover exchange rates in particular is because it's a section in the economic study design that students have a hard time grasping 9 times out of 10. So let's see if we could just break it down and simplify things so you can do better in your next upcoming test. Alright, so when we're talking about exchange rates, we're looking at how much one currency needs to be exchanged in order to obtain another unit of currency. We will primarily focus on the study design about how the AUD, or how much AUD needs to be swapped out in order to obtain USD. The reason why we focus on the USD is because most commodities, if not all, are traded in USD. And the reason behind this is because after the removal of the gold standard, the Americans found a clever way to ensure that the USD was still a very valuable form of asset or form of currency to hold relative to other currencies around the globe. Anyway, I won't bore you too much about that. If you want to look into it, just check out the removal of the USD gold standard, and they'll explain to you how the USD still managed to maintain its value even after they got rid of the gold standard. Moving on. When we talk about depreciation of the AUD, we're trying to tell you that the Australian dollar is now worth less, meaning that we have to exchange more Australian dollars in order to get a foreign currency. And when we talk about the appreciation of the Australian dollar, we're talking about the opposite. It means that when we exchange one Australian dollar, we're getting more of a foreign currency. And this plays an important part because it influences AUD and AS very differently depending on which side you look at. So this is the trend of the Australian dollar compared to the US greenback or the USD. You can see here that we used to be at about, well, we hit a peak at about like 72 or 73 cents this time last year, and now we're currently sitting at about 67 cents. So we can see that this is a downward trend. If I gave you this as a SAC question and asked you to tell me what is the trend of the AUD to USD over the past year, you would need to tell me what it was at the start of the period, which is like, what's this here? About 69 cents. And then you have to tell me what it is at the end of the period, which is currently at 67.609, which is lower. So you could say that the currency is on a downward trend. That's how you get your 2 marks. But anyway, let's move on. We know that the Australian dollar is depreciating, so how does that impact AD and AS? So when we're talking about depreciation of the AUD and its impact to AD, we need to remember that a depreciation of the AUD means foreigners have cheaper access to Australian goods. In other words, an American, a Chinese person, whoever it may be, can now exchange less of their local currency in order to get Australian dollars. So effectively, they're getting a discount for their goods and services. If Australian products are cheaper to foreigners, it'll most likely increase net exports or increase exports relative to our imports. This increase in net exports on the AD formula causes the AD curve to shift to the right, as shown here. And what do you notice when the AD curve's at the right? Prices go up and GDP increases. So that's the impact the depreciation of the AUD has on the aggregate demand. Now we're going to see what happens to aggregate supply. Depreciation of the AUD has a completely different impact. You need to remember, crew, that when we manufacture stuff in Australia, not all of it, well, very rarely, every single component used to produce the product is made in Australia. We're in a very globalized economy now, and we tend to source or outsource parts from other parts of the world because they can effectively do it faster, better, and cheaper in most cases. So, when the dollar depreciates, it means businesses need to exchange more AUD in order to obtain the same unit of foreign currency. Effectively, it means that the cost of importing these products will be more expensive. And if import costs are more expensive, that equals to increased costs of production, which is a negative aggregate supply factor. And we know when there's a negative AS factor, it shifts the AS curve to the left, as shown here. So when we shift it to the left, you can see that prices will go up because prices used to be at P1. There's no P2 here, but imagine if there's a P2 here. Prices go up and you'll notice that GDP falls. So that's the impact of a depreciation of AUD on the aggregate supply curve. Now you're probably wondering, alright, so the depreciation of the AUD has a negative impact on supply and has a positive impact on AD. Now, which force is stronger to cause GDP to either going backwards or forwards? And this is where we go to our contemporary example. You can see that in the red box here, terms of trade rose 0.6%, as the growth in export prices outpaced the growth in import prices, meaning that the average value of our exports is greater than the average value of our imports. For simplicity's sake, let's just say that our net exports are increasing because of this. Well, is that good or bad? Well, that tells us that AD has a greater impact than AES does in terms of our GDP output. Now, why is it that net exports are increasing even though the dollar's depreciating? Well, think of it this way. If our stuff is cheaper, it makes it more attractive to buy. If it's more attractive to buy, then more likely to buy more of it. And that's what's happening here. So in the end, the aggregate demand force is stronger than the aggregate supply force in terms of contributing to economic activity at the moment. It could change in the future, we don't know, but as of December's GDP report, exports are doing much better than our imports. Anyway, that's all I have to share with you today. Please keep this in mind for your upcoming SAC when you're doing Area Study 3 International Trade. That, you know, these changes in the Australian dollar has a different impact on AD compared to AES. And by understanding how AD has a greater impact than AES in this particular factor, you should be able to link it back to your goals. How should it impact the strong sustainable economic growth? Well, right now we're at what, 2.7? By having a depreciated AD rises, this should bring us closer towards 3 to 3.5%. If we're talking about the goal of low inflation, currently we're at 7%. This increase in AD will further bring us away from our goal of 2 to 3% inflation. And when we're talking about the full employment goal, currently we're sitting at about 3.5% unemployment. So by having more AD, we're actually creating more jobs. And that brings us further away from our Nauru target, which is, some say it's at approximately 4.25%. But if you want to get more technical about it, we just need to see what's happening to wages and what's happening to demand inflation as a result of lower unemployment. And some would argue that right now unemployment is just too low, that it's actually creating some inflationary pressures. So there you have it. I've just explained how exchange rate impacts all those goals. So take away what you will from this information, and good luck for your upcoming tests. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment or send me an email. Catch ya.